when is the right time to use a business case? Now, what I mean by that is, what from your experience should be the size of the deal to warrant the effort to go into business case. I've been lazy in the past life in selling different
Mm,
services and products where I probably should have or shouldn't have. I think,
mm.
is a 5,000 deal warranted, or is it only for 50,000 plus? What's your experience here?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I get this. This is probably the most common question I get asked. Oh, how much work do I have to put in if it's only 5 grand, right? You kind of go, well, if it's only 5 grand, for some people, spending 5 grand, that's a lot of money. Yeah. And we've got to
Mm,
sometimes think about this and go, hang on a second, let me put my need second for a minute and let me really think about this from the buyer's perspective. And that's why we put together this podcast, right? Because we want to help shift the way sellers look at things and we want them to look at it from the buyer's perspective. Now, the framework that I'm going to walk our audience through today, Dave, is a framework that can be used in a more complex, larger deal, 50 a mil, 10 mil, but it can also be used for those 3, 5, 10, 20K deals, right? The only difference is the way you communicate that to the prospect and to the client. Yeah. So to answer your question, in every decision making process somebody's making, they are doing an assessment of what am I going to get for the money that I spend. Yeah. What we're trying to do here is we're trying to help facilitate that thought process so we can help them quantify that versus just letting them come up with their own number or come up with their own answer to the question. Because often what happens and what kills deals is silent objections, right? The objection that they never bring up becomes a question that they don't answer, and then there's a lack of information. And that lack of information stops them from progressing. Yeah, that's why when people say you handle an objection, no, it's simply about enabling them with the right level of information so they can have the confidence to move forward. Yeah. And often that lack of
yeah.
information stops them from moving forward. So we're either going to do one of two things here. We're going to have a little bit of control and try to influence the process, or we don't. So this is about helping influence that process and giving enough information to the buyer. Because at the end of the day, you can't control the decision the buyer makes. What you can do is help them sort of determine what am I spending and what am I getting? Is it worth me making this investment or is it worth me just saying no? Yeah.
Yeah, this sounds like a shit ton of work, but it doesn't have to be, right? Like, there's two ways
No.
of doing it. You could do a one pager. You can do it a bit more in depth, depending on the deal
Correct.
size. Um, so this sounds great because look, we do this
Yeah.
ourselves and try to build this into our process. So let's break it down for us, Louis. What should be in a business case?
Yeah, perfect. And you've hit the nail on the head here, right? It does sound like a lot of work, but again, it can be a document that you send as a Google
Mm,
Doc, right? And or it can be an email. But what needs to be in that communication? And there are some pretty cool tools out there. You can get, digital sales rooms that you can put this together and send it out. But if you just want to start and you're not using something like this at the moment, just start with a basic Google Doc. And the reason why I love Google Docs is because it becomes a tool that you can collaborate with the prospect. You can actually send it to them and ask them for feedback and get them to start working on the document together, right? And we know one of the stages of commitment in the sales process is the commitment to collaboration. But let me just go back a step. So, what's really, really important, and when you start to produce this document, is the minute you have that first meeting. So, that first meeting that you have with a prospect to start understanding and determining is there a reason for us to progress? And the reason needs to be centered around a problem statement. Yeah. So, there needs to be some form of problem that you're discussing where your solution could help them solve. Because if there's no problem, there's no sale, right? Nobody's going to say to you, Dave, I want to give you money just for the sake of giving you money because I like you. Unfortunately, that doesn't really happen in business, right? There needs to be a problem. So the very first part of the business case needs to be centered around the problem statement, right? And sometimes the prospect hasn't got clarity over what that problem statement is. And that's why that first meeting, it's important to really go in and ask some questions to get clarity over that problem statement, right? So the first part of the business case needs to be built around the problem statement. And usually you have an executive summary. And the executive summary, I'm not talking about a 2-page document. I'm talking about, you know, 150 words. This is why we met. This is what we discussed, and this is what the problem statement is for the business. Then what's important to have underneath that, depending on the role of the person you're talking to, right? Because usually what happens is, and again, depending on the size of the opportunity, will depend on how deep you go here. In some cases, you might start to determine the KPIs that are important to them. You might say, hey, these are some key KPIs that you're working on, and this is the gap. Yeah, this is the gap that's preventing you from achieving those KPIs. So there's now you're starting to get the commercial aspect of the business case. Then the next section needs to have stuff around your current state. So what's currently impacting you, your business, performance, customers, whatever you've captured in that meeting. And then you need to have some form of desired state. So what are the outcomes that you're looking to achieve, right? And then you have your mutual action plan below, which are the steps that you need to do in order to progress this opportunity further. Now, if you think about that now, I've just laid out kind of that foundation of your business case. Now,
Mm.
we call that our scoping document, right? Because, before we can even think about demo, before we can even think about solution, we need to get clarity over the scope. And what that does is it allows us to go, hey, we're getting an understanding. These are the problems that you're facing. This is what's happening in your business. This is the impact of these problems and the KPIs. But this is where you're going, because people don't buy what you do, they buy the outcome you help them achieve. So determining those desired state points is critical. And then having a very clear action plan.